After I was diagnosed with cancer, my husband, Ethan, went to great lengths to get me into a clinical trial for a new experimental drug, insisting it would cure me. I thought it was a true testament to our love in times of hardship. That was until I discovered the person injecting me with the drugs was his white moonlight, his lost love, Serena. I watched helplessly as my body began to rot and fester. Even the child growing inside me was consumed and vanished by the harsh medication. Yet, Ethan was completely indifferent, instead gently reassuring Serena, "Don't worry, you'll get all the credit for this new drug development. She's the only cancer patient in the group. How could I blame you? She got access to the new drug so quickly. All thanks to your hard work. I should be on my knees thanking you." In the end, the trial failed and I died. Upon seeing my corpse, he raged, smashing up the lab. "Didn't they say the new drug was guaranteed to work?" Before my last breath, my body was beyond recognition. It was a mass of raw, decaying flesh. The slightest touch would peel off a layer of skin. My own mother couldn't even bear to touch me. She could only stay a distance away, begging me not to leave. I looked back desperately at the long, empty corridor. Hasn't he come yet? Even speaking left a putrid, metallic taste in my mouth. My mother trembled, pulled out my phone and redialed Ethan's number. This time he finally answered. But his voice was impatient. "Didn't I tell you? The next few days are crucial for Serena's trials. I need to focus on taking care of her. Stop bothering me." My mother choked back a sob, her voice already hoarse. "Ethan, it's me. Can you come to the hospital? Lily is failing quickly. She wanted to speak to you one last time." There was a brief, telling pause on the other end, followed by a scoff. Ethan said mockingly, "Auntie, are you serious? Did Lily tell you to say that? I've told her countless times. There's nothing between Serena and me. Tell her to stop being so jealous, will you?" No, Lily really is." Ethan cut her off. "Enough. She's been able to survive this long all thanks to Serena giving her the chance for this trial. She can't even be grateful and she's filled with such nasty thoughts. It's disgusting. Tell her that once she's better, she should come stay in the lab for a while, cook and clean for Serena, as a way of paying back her kindness." Serena's sweet voice came through the phone. "Ethan, is it done yet? The birthday candles are going to burn out." My body convulsed, my vision blurring. My mother was pleading, "Ethan, I'm begging you, Lily is really dying." Ethan's patience finally ran out. "Then just die faster and further away, don't pollute my sight." The line was cut without another word. I stared blankly at the ceiling, feeling my breath fading. The small life growing inside me had stopped fighting too. My heart beat calmly. I thought I'd be terribly sad, so reluctant to let go. But hearing such words, I was unusually calm. My mother wailed, "My poor Lily." "Mom, don't cry." I mumbled, pieces of flesh falling from my mouth. "Help me make a recording. I want to leave one last message for Ethan." After leaving my final message for Ethan, I died. I took my unborn child, who wasn't even 4 months old, with me. My mother followed my instructions and erected tombstones for both me and the child. But my body she didn't have the authority to take away. Because I'd signed the trial agreement. After the trial failed, my body would be returned to the lab for analysis, before finally being allowed to be laid to rest. And so my soul followed my body, floating into the lab. The person in charge of analyzing the samples was Ethan himself. The sample shows excessive dosage of medication. Check it against the database. Ethan frowned slightly. The body has almost completely decayed and collapsed. Verify if there were any irregularities in the application of the drug. This is unusual. Even if the trial fails, it shouldn't be like this. His assistant nodded, noting it down. Ethan then froze. His eyes narrowed as he held onto the computer. She was pregnant during the trial? There's clearly a child inside. Confirm which group this sample came from. This is a violation of protocol. The assistant responded with an "oh." But before he could check, there was a knock at the door. Through the glass, Serena was smiling brightly, mouthing, "Ethan, guess what I brought you?" She held up a small cake. Ethan's face, which had been stern, instantly softened with tenderness. "This looks like Serena." Ethan cut his assistant off. "Everything else is fine. Check the data and notify the family to come and pick up the body. I have things to attend to." The assistant swallowed his words. Ethan pushed open the door and swallowed a spoonful of the cake that Serena had carved out. Then he said with a smile, "Delicious." This was completely different from how I remembered him, the man who hated sweets. I loved baking cakes. The birthday cake at our wedding was one I had made myself. We'd met through a matchmaking event. Though we had no emotional foundation, such an exceptional man always attracted attention, so I'd fallen in love with him at first sight and threw myself into the relationship. But on our wedding day, Ethan had tossed my handmade cake into the trash. He'd frowned, showing a slight distaste. "Don't make these anymore. I don't like sweets. They're too much." From then on, I never baked again. He was a man of strict rules, where everything had to conform to his personal standards. To accommodate him, I gave up a lot, continuously telling myself, Ethan is just that kind of person. Since we decided to spend our lives together, we should learn to tolerate each other. Who would have thought that all these years, it was only me who was tolerating him? Serena's return broke all of his rules in an instant. At first I was jealous, angry, and we would even have heated arguments. All of it was met with his frustration and impatience. "Lily, are you ever going to stop bothering me? Just because I married you doesn't mean I love you. Back then I just needed a wife to settle down. Stop thinking so highly of yourself, will you?" He broke my heart. I wanted to file for divorce, but at that crucial moment I found out I was pregnant. For my child's sake I endured all of the grievances. But I did not expect that fate had other plans. I was diagnosed with cancer. For a long time he was incredibly attentive. I thought that was true love in times of difficulty, that he had actually fallen in love with me. But now when I look back, I was just a tool from beginning to end. I was a tool for him to placate his parents about marriage. I was also a tool to help Serena get the credit she desired. He never loved me. My mother came to collect me. She brought 2 coffins. Outside, a vehicle waited to transport the bodies. When Serena came out, my mother saw her and rushed towards her, excitedly grabbing her hands. "Lily, Lily. Lily, are you back to see your mother?" My mother had mistaken Serena for me. It was understandable. I'd been shocked the first time I saw Serena too. How could 2 people who weren't even related look so alike? Looking back on it, Ethan might have chosen me as his tool for that very reason. A form of substitution. I was practically Serena's stand-in. Serena was startled by my mother and screamed, pushing my mother away. My mother fell to the ground, her elbow scraped raw on the concrete, leaving a long bloody streak. As if she couldn't feel any pain, she lunged at Serena and grabbed her leg, crying, "Lily, your mother doesn't want to lose you." My heart ached. I rushed forward to hug my mother, but my arms just passed right through her. I couldn't do anything but watch. In the struggle, Serena's cake fell to the ground. She was furious and slapped my mother across the face. "You crazy old hag. Are you sick in the head? I'm Serena. Just the fact that that bitch Lily looked like me is an insult. How dare you mistake me for her?" My mother, stunned by the blow, stood up shakily. As she was about to speak, Serena's expression changed abruptly, looking pitiful on the verge of tears. "Auntie, it's all my fault. I shouldn't have clung to Ethan, but I haven't slept in days and it's my birthday, so I just wanted Ethan to spend time with me. If you're angry, hit me. But please don't hurt yourself." She turned and was embraced by Ethan. Ethan looked furious. "Auntie, I've shown you respect because you're an elder. But are you going too far by bullying Serena like this? Remember, Lily's access to the experimental drug was all thanks to Serena. She can cut off her supply anytime she wants." Hearing those words, my mother, who was sitting on the ground, lifted her head, her eyes bloodshot and roaring from the depths of her throat. "Then cut it. Cut it off. It doesn't matter, Lily doesn't need it anymore." She pointed towards the 2 coffins, her eyes tearing up. "She's dead." Ethan froze, his expression turning very ugly. He took a deep breath, suppressing his anger, and said coldly, "Do you 2 have to make such a scene? Making trouble at home is one thing, but bringing 2 coffins here into my workplace is a direct challenge to me." My mother sneered. "Don't you know why there are 2 coffins? Besides Lily, there's your child." "Enough." Serena grasped Ethan's hand, acting as the peacemaker. "Ethan, it's okay, don't be angry. What does Auntie know? She just wants to vent her anger for her daughter." She looked down at the mess of cake on the ground, her eyes slightly red. I just feel sorry for the cake, I just finished making it. Ethan frowned and said without any kindness. The cake's been completely ruined. Auntie, tell Lily when you see her that she's always like making these things anyway. Tell her to quickly make a cake and send it to the revolving restaurant. It's Serena's birthday. Serena said shamelessly. Ethan, didn't you say Lily's cheesecake was delicious too? Could I try some? My mother was trembling with rage. She grabbed the cake from the ground and threw it at Serena. Serena, who had purposely worn a small black dress for the occasion, was instantly covered in a large splash of cake, completely ruining the outfit. Even her face was covered in it. Serena screamed, and before Ethan could stop it, my mother grabbed her hair and dragged her to the side. The coffins were open. My mother was unbelievably strong. She grabbed Serena's arm and shoved her inside. Go on then, eat. You can eat it in the underworld. I'll ask my Lily to make it for you herself. Serena's head hit the top of the coffin, her eyes wide open, letting out a scream of pure terror. My mother's principles were to be kind to everyone. She had a good temper and never lost it with anyone. Even when I caused trouble, she would smile, fix the problem, and gently tell me not to be so naughty next time. I'd never imagined that for my sake, my mother would go to these lengths. She seemed like she had gone mad trying to force Serena into that coffin. No one could stop her. Ethan finally lost his composure. He grabbed my mother by the neck and shouted, "Have you lost your mind?" My mother screamed, struggling, and bit down on Ethan's neck, tearing off a chunk of his flesh. Ethan was enraged and, grabbing her around the waist, flung her into the coffin, then slammed it shut. His face dark, his eyes red with anger. "Auntie, you stay in there and calm down." He turned and gently helped Serena out, tenderly wiping the cake off her face, completely ignoring my mother, who was struggling and yelling inside the coffin. My mother's voice soon faded. I could just barely hear the soft whimpers as she called my name. "Lily, where are you? Mommy is scared." My mother was afraid of the dark. I was raised by my single mother, and she would work until late to support me. I would always wait for her in the long dark alley outside our home, waiting to walk her back. When she held my hand, she felt brave enough to walk through the dark. She also had claustrophobia. She had once been trapped in an elevator and suffered a month-long fever, almost dying from it. And now my only family member in the world had been callously locked inside a coffin by Ethan. He knew that my mother was afraid of the dark. I was hovering in the air, shaking with rage, trying my best to squeeze myself into that small, narrow coffin, but I could only hear my mother's frightened voice. She kept calling my name, her face covered in tears. "Lily, Mommy's so scared." The driver, who worked in the hospital, couldn't stand it anymore. He spoke out. "Dr. Chun, what you're doing isn't right." Ethan was past reasoning with anger and just said coldly, "I don't care who you're here to pick up, just take these 2 coffins and go. Once you reach your destination, let her out. She can't keep coming here and causing me trouble." Ethan said, disgusted. "She's so unlucky." He threw the cloth he'd used to wipe cake off Serena's face into the other open coffin. Inside was a set of baby clothes. It was something I had bought for my unborn child. Sadly, the child never had the chance to wear it. The dirty soil and cake had ruined the baby clothes. Ethan ignored it, and was deaf to my mother's cries for help. And so my mother's skinny body was locked inside that small dark coffin for a very long time. The driver couldn't bear it, and pulled over on the side of the road to open the coffin. My mother, suddenly seeing the sunlight, had her eyes stung with pain and tears streamed down her red face. She tilted her head like she could see me. "Lily, is that you? Mommy's coming to find you, okay?" That night, Ethan came home late. Serena stumbled in first, drunk, while Ethan parked the car. Right after, the sounds of Serena's terrifying screams came from inside the villa. Ethan was shocked. He didn't even bother to lock the car as he rushed into the villa. He immediately saw the figure hanging and swinging from the tree. My mother had taken her own life. No matter how much I pleaded, she couldn't feel my presence. Ethan, with his face ashen, rushed to cut her down. He laid her down on the ground and brushed her face, his eyes flickering. "She still has a pulse." Ethan ordered Serena to call 911 right away. Then he started calling me. 3 times, but I didn't answer. While they waited for the ambulance, Serena said in a corner quietly, "Ethan, how could Auntie suddenly want to commit suicide? Is it because of what happened this afternoon?" Serena's eyes were red as if she was truly wronged. "It's all my fault, I should have just endured it." Hearing her words, Ethan was furious and began calling my number again more desperately. He comforted Serena. "It's not your fault, she's just too weak. She can't handle even a little bit of hardship." I still didn't pick up, so Ethan started sending frantic voice messages. "Lily, are you all crazy? If you're sick, go get treated. Why come here and cause trouble? Your mother hung herself in my house, did you know that? If she wanted to die, she could have died far away. Is she trying to be disgusting on purpose? She was just locked up for a bit. Why does she have to make such a big deal about it? Or did you tell her to do it? Just so you can have a tantrum?" Each word was like a piercing arrow. I reached up to cover my chest and couldn't help but scoff. I was actually not sad at all. "Ethan, you must have forgotten by now. When I first married you, I only said one thing to you. I said my mother was scared of the dark. And you had hung the Chinese wisteria tree with little string lights. You had said, so that mother won't be scared anymore. And now? You locked her up all alone in a coffin for such a long time. Come to the city hospital to take care of your mother," Ethan said, throwing down the phone. "I'm telling you now, I will not deal with her. Suicide is her choice and I have nothing to do with it. Don't you even think about using this to threaten me. She bullied Serena just because she was an elder. This is her own fault." The ambulance arrived. My mother was carried on board, and Ethan and Serena went with her. Behind the tree in a corner nearby, there was a letter written by my mother. When Serena first came inside and saw my mother, her first reaction was not to scream. Instead, she hid the letter that my mother had clutched so tightly in her hand. And then she screamed. My mother was rushed to the emergency room. The doctor frowned. "Are you family? The patient is in critical condition. We'll do our best to save her. Please sign here." Ethan hesitated before signing, then sent me a voice message. "Where the hell are you? Don't you know your mother is dying?" Serena comforted him. "Maybe Lily has something important to attend to. Let's not bother her." Furious, Ethan couldn't listen to anything Serena said. He persistently kept calling me. I remained silent. Helpless, he called the hospital's operator's office. "Please connect me to Zheng Lily in room 1032. The nurse was taken aback. Zheng Lily. She has already passed away." Ethan froze. "That's impossible." He would rather think he had dialed the wrong number than believe that I was truly dead. He immediately hung up and started searching online for the new operator's number. Serena asked, "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Some scammer said that Lily is dead." "How could she be dead? Didn't she have the new drug to save her life?" Serena's face showed a flash of panic. She quickly pressed her hand on the back of Ethan's. "Don't worry, everything will work out." Before she could finish her sentence, Ethan's phone rang again. This time it was his assistant. Ethan picked up the call, exhausted. "What is it?" The assistant gulped, seemingly choosing his words carefully before telling him the truth. After taking a deep breath, he said, "Dr. Chun, do you remember the female corpse we compared the data with this afternoon? I verified it. Her sample code was A167, from Dr. Serena's lab." Ethan froze, his face paling. "A167? Are you sure you didn't make a mistake?" "No mistake." His assistant sighed. "Dr. Chun, it's your wife Zheng Lily's trial number. And we've also confirmed the child in her womb. It was a girl. Ms. Zheng was almost 4 months pregnant when the trial medications almost completely disintegrated her limbs, causing the fetus to die in utero." With a thud, Ethan's phone crashed to the ground. He looked forward in a daze. Then he turned his head stiffly to look at Serena. It seemed like he was slowly processing something. But Serena, unaware of the situation, asked softly, "What is it? Who was that on the phone?" "Ethan, you look so pale. What happened?" "It's fake." Ethan spoke suddenly. "It must be fake." He stood up abruptly and rushed out of the hospital without a second thought. Serena hurried after him. "What's wrong? Ethan, tell me, maybe I can help." Ethan squeezed out a few words while rushing out. They said, "Lily's dead." How could that be? The experimental drug was supposed to be the most effective treatment against cancer. How could she have died? I need to see it myself. Serena's face changed drastically as she ran after him. But at that moment, Ethan only seemed to have one thing in his mind, as he stepped on the gas and left Serena behind. He sped down the road drenched in sweat. He seemed like he was in a great hurry. I wanted to stay by my mother's side, but seeing him like this, I followed him, wondering what he was up to. Ethan drove straight to the lab. His assistant was packing up to leave work, and he was surprised to see Ethan. "Dr. Chun, what are you doing here?" "I want to see 167, Ethan said, his voice low. My decaying, unrecognizable face suddenly appeared in front of Ethan, seeming to startle him. He snapped back into clarity for a brief moment and reached out to touch my shoulder. I knew he was going to check if there was a birthmark there. His assistant quickly stopped him. "Dr. Chun, please don't touch a 167. Her side effects from the medication are severe. Besides systemic poisoning, she seems to have epidermolysis bullosa acquisita. The mucous membranes are almost completely eroded. The slightest touch can peel off a layer of skin." Ethan didn't listen. He only wanted to know the truth. So he grabbed my shoulder and rolled me over. When he saw the dark red butterfly-shaped birthmark on my shoulder, he was struck by lightning. He pulled his hand back, trembling. Because of his quick movement, a large piece of bloody flesh came off, sticking to his finger. Ethan's legs gave out and he sank to the floor. He stared blankly at the bloody flesh on his hand, murmuring, "It really was her, it really was her. How could this be?" He looked up at his assistant. His eyes were bloodshot, and his suppressed panic and anger suddenly erupted. With a wave of his hand, everything around him was smashed on the floor. He was like a man possessed, only concerned with venting his repressed rage. Then he suddenly saw his assistant. He grabbed his collar, yelling, "Give me all the data for A167. His voice trembled as if about to sink into the ground. "Didn't they say the new drug was guaranteed to work?" He acted as if my death was an earth-shattering, unbelievable tragedy. I was confused. "Ethan, weren't you eager for me to die? Why do you look so lost now?" Ethan didn't sleep all night. My data was minimal, there was nothing much to see. After taking the experimental drug, I wasn't used for any further tests, only for my daily examination results to be recorded. And they drew many tubes of blood from me. But compared to drawing blood, the pain from cancer made me wish for death. In the end, the side effects of the experimental drug manifested even more intensely. I was like a living dead person, desperate to never open my eyes again. No, that's wrong. By the end, I was barely able to open my eyes, because even my eyes had decayed. Now seeing Ethan's unexpected reaction, I didn't feel happy at all. Only a sense of sadness. What was the point of putting on an act like this after a person has died? Ethan was in a daze until the hospital called, which brought him back to his senses. "Mr. Chun, please come to the hospital and settle the bill. The patient has been resuscitated successfully. She should wake up soon." Ethan jumped up and rushed outside. My mother was lying quietly in bed, her neck still bearing the purple bruise of her attempted suicide. Seeing her, I couldn't help but float towards her and gently hug her shoulders. "Mom, you're so foolish. Your life has just begun. Why couldn't you live well?" When she saw Ethan, my mother's hands balled into fists. Her hateful gaze fixed on him. "What do you want?" She coughed harshly, as if her lungs were about to fall out. Ethan stood there. For the first time I saw cautious and careful on his face. He asked with a pale face, "Weary? Auntie, Lily, when did she?" My mother laughed, finally unable to hold it in. Ethan, you finally believe that Lily is dead? Do you remember how I pleaded with you that day?" My mother mustered all her strength to get up, staring at him with the look of a demon. She said, each word dripping with venom, "I begged you, I said Lily was dying, she wanted to see you one last time to say a few words. And what did you do? You told her to die faster, to die further away, and not to pollute your sight." Ethan was shocked, trembling, trying to explain himself. "Auntie, I didn't mean it that way. I just thought she had the experimental drug, how could she die?" So I really thought you were lying to me. Then look, am I lying? My mother laughed scornfully. My foolish daughter, even before she died, she was thinking about leaving a few words for you. And what about you? I wanted to take her body away, to let her be laid to rest. But you said I was bringing bad luck with those 2 coffins. Did you even know that those 2 coffins were the future home of the mother and daughter? A place where they were going to lie forever. My mother was in so much pain that it was hard to breathe. She clutched her chest and wailed. If it wasn't for your damned experimental drug, Lily wouldn't have suffered such a horrific death. The biggest mistake she made in this life was to be with you. Ethan's body went limp as he sank onto the floor, shaking his head. How could this happen? That experimental drug has undergone numerous trials. It shouldn't have had any problems, so why did Lily? My mother's laugh was eerie. Ethan, why don't you ask Serena, who you love so much? When Lily's body first showed some issues, I begged her. I wanted to stop the trial. But what did she say? She said, Auntie, you've signed the contract, you're making a contribution to China's medical research. Even if you die, let her have the data recorded. Ethan nearly dropped his phone. He got up in a daze and stumbled out. As he opened the door, he saw that Serena was standing outside, her face pale. Her eyes were red, as if she was a rabbit caught in headlights. She whispered, Ethan, I didn't think Lily would really. You don't blame me, right? Behind them, my mother was laughing like a madwoman. Seeing Serena like this, she said softly, Ethan, did you see the child in Lily's belly? The other coffin is for your daughter. Her clothes are also inside. My mother paused as if she remembered something. Oh, that's right, the clothes were ruined with your cake, so they were thrown away. Your daughter died without even having any clothes to wear. Ethan froze, his eyes blank, staring forward, motionless. Ethan, Serena said tentatively, her voice full of fear. Don't ignore me, say something. You know too, before the experimental drug enters the clinical trial, we put in so much effort. When we found that Lily's body was reacting differently, I was worried that more issues would arise, so I wanted to keep testing. Her sacrifice can save countless lives. That is something to be glorified. When she said this, Serena's expression turned cold, her eyes showing a flash of apathy. Besides, she already had cancer. She wouldn't have lived much longer anyway. Hearing that, Ethan looked up with rage. His gaze, filled with utter disappointment, fell on her. Serena, how could you think that? Serena grabbed Ethan's arm. Ethan, are you blaming me? I'm telling the truth. She wouldn't have lived much longer anyway. Ethan pushed her hand away, struggling to say the words. But the reason she joined the clinical trial in the first place was because this experimental drug was the only thing that could have helped her. He shook his head, his mind in turmoil. I never wanted her to die. Floating in the air, I couldn't help but laugh. Ethan, you never wanted me to die. But everything you said, everything you did, made me suffer more than if I had been dead. And in the end, I still died. My and my daughter's bodies were cremated by Ethan. On the day they went to cancel my registration at the register office, his assistant glanced at Ethan again and again. Ethan noticed him. Is there something you want to say? His assistant hesitated. Do you want to report Serena's violation of protocol? A spark of inspiration flashed in Ethan's mind. He stood up, his eyes changing. You mean? The assistant nodded. Pregnant women are not allowed to participate in clinical trials, but Ms. Zhang seems to have. Whether Serena was aware of her pregnancy is unknown. If she was, she may face a major demerit. Ethan's expression was incredibly unpleasant. It seemed as though he was thinking of more than just protocol violations. Don't say anything about it for now, Ethan said, pursing his lips. He stood up to leave. Give me the key to Serena's lab. I'll go take a look. His assistant said okay, as he quickly followed. Do you need to tell her? Ethan looked down. No, there's something I need to figure out. The team that was in charge of the development of the experimental drug was Serena's lab, so almost all of the data were stored there. It could be said that it was a violation for Ethan to enter the lab, but he didn't know what he was thinking. He took the risk and went in anyway. He stayed there all night. All of the neatly organized documents were rummaged through by Ethan and his assistant and tossed all over the floor. One cold number after another flooded Ethan's mind. And a terrible truth was revealed before Ethan's eyes. There's nothing wrong with the experimental drug. His assistant looked confused. From what I can see, the experimental drug went through all the required procedures to reach the last clinical trial stage. Countless data comparisons beforehand show that there is nothing wrong with it. So why did Ms. Zhang show such severe side effects? Could it be that Ms. Zhang's body was different? His assistant was still puzzled, but Ethan, looking up from the countless data, now understood everything. He nodded gently. Yes, there was nothing wrong. So, the one who had the problem was her. He stood up, swept the documents aside, and began to dial Serena's phone number. At the same time, Serena's phone started ringing outside the door of the lab. Serena screamed, "Ethan, you're crazy. It's a violation for you to enter my lab without permission. Get out of here now." Ethan looked at her calmly and questioned her, each word sharp. How did Lily really die? Serena looked flustered and avoided Ethan's eyes. Didn't I already say? The experimental drug still had problems. With a slap, Ethan threw a piece of scrap paper in Serena's face. The sharp edge of the paper cut a small gash in Serena's cheek. She covered her face and cried out in pain. Serena, I did calculations all night and found a particularly ridiculous piece of data. Ethan said softly, scoffing. Would you like to hear it? Serena unconsciously took a step back. The dose of the experimental drug you gave Lily was too much. Serena's expression changed slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. Not just too much. Ethan's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a coldness, his voice coming from the depths of hell, each word cutting deep. The experimental drug should be taken separately, but in addition to the experimental drug, you also injected her with other medications at the same time, medications that could cause lethal poisons when mixed. Yes, you didn't record this drug, but do you know? There is a separate ledger for all medications used. There are a lot of drugs that have gone missing. Where did they go? Ethan laughed. You injected them all into Lily, didn't you? Serena opened her mouth, unable to say a single word. She could only shake her head. Why did you do this to Lily? Ethan grabbed her wrist, questioning her harshly. Serena pulled her hand away, but his grip tightened. She kept shaking her head. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she broke down. Serena bit down on Ethan's wrist and said with a bitter laugh, Ethan, why do you not know? Because I love you. Serena was in tears. Do you know how I felt when I came back and found out you were married? Countless times I asked you if you'd divorce young Lily, but you always stayed silent. When I found out she had cancer, I was so excited. I could finally be with you again. But why did the lab have to develop the experimental drug? And why did it just so happen to work on her cancer? Serena laughed coldly, her once gentle face now filled with malice. If she survived, I'd never have the chance to be with you again. Ethan, I could only do this because I love you. Ethan looked at her with silence and disappointment. In the end, he took several steps back, shaking his head softly. But Serena, this is murder. You will go to prison. The two stood there in a deathly silence, staring at each other. Finally, Serena pulled her hand away and laughed a chilling laugh. Then a flash of light appeared as a needle was aimed at Ethan's body. She roared, Don't blame me. Since you know my secrets and you're not on my side, then you all deserve to die. You don't love me anymore, you love Zheng Lily, right? If that's the case, I'll just have to send you all to the underworld, as a pair of star-crossed lovers. Her eyes were bloodshot as she lunged forward. The needle stabbed into Ethan's body. She injected the contents of the syringe. And Ethan was also too weak to fight back, robbed of all his strength. But luckily there was an assistant in the lab. He rushed forward, kicking Serena away. Serena turned to inject the assistant. Just when she was about to succeed, the sound of police sirens suddenly rang out, each one like a death knell. Serena recoiled in horror. She tried to escape, but Ethan stomped on her body and pinned her down. He looked down at her and shook his head softly. Serena, you did wrong. Hearing that, Serena burst into laughter. Ethan, do you really think I'm the only one who killed Zheng Lily? If you had only cared a little about her, you would have noticed the problems with the experimental drug a long time ago. Admit it, you don't love her either, You've only ever loved yourself. Ethan's body froze, his eyes dazed for a moment, and he began to sway. Serena was sentenced and Ethan, because of the drugs that had been injected into his body, was admitted into the ICU, hovering on the brink of death, finally clinging back to life. The first thing he wanted to do when he opened his eyes was to see my mother. So he called her. On the phone he begged, "Auntie, I'm begging you." What did Lily say in the end? What did she say to me? My mother was silent for a long time, but she didn't hang up the phone. Finally she sighed. "Forget it, these words were meant for you anyway. If you want to hear them, then listen to them." My mother converted the recorded voice message to a file and sent it to Ethan. In his hospital bed, Ethan, who had finally received the recording, clicked on the file with anticipation. Inside, my cold voice spoke slowly. "Ethan, I hate you. May we never meet again in any life." With a thud, Ethan's phone fell to the floor. He closed his eyes in despair, and 2 tears flowed from his eyes. "Lily," he murmured with a hoarse voice. "I'm sorry. It's all my fault." I thought that he would never listen to the recording again. But who would have thought that for many years after that, he would always take out that recording and listen to it. Over and over again, like self-torture, he listened for many years. Until one day, he finally chose to hang himself on the old Chinese wisteria tree in front of his house. But all of that has nothing to do with me anymore. The day the murderer was caught, I had already gone to my next life and lived a peaceful and happy life.